Martin Hewitt, Investigator, by Arthur Morrison. 2. The Loss of Sammy Crockett. It was, of course, always a part of Martin Hewitt's business to be thoroughly at home among any and every class of people, and to interest himself intelligently, or to appear to do so in their various pursuits. In one of the most important cases ever placed in his hands, he could have gone but a short way toward success had he not displayed some knowledge of the more sordid aspects of professional sports, and a great interest in their undertakings of a certain dealer within. The great case itself had nothing to do with sports, and indeed, from a narrative point of view, was somewhat uninteresting. But the man who alone held up the piece of information wanted was a keeper, backer, or gaffer of professional pedestrians, and it was through the medium of his pecuniary interest in such matters that Hewitt was enabled to strike a bargain with him. The man was a publican on the outskirts of Padfield, a northern town pretty famous for its sporting tastes, and to Padfield, therefore, Hewitt betook himself, and arrayed in a way to indicate some inclination of his own towards sport, he began to frequent the bar of the Hare and Hounds. Kentish, the landlord, was a stout, bull-necked man of no great communicativeness at first, but after a little acquaintance he opened out wonderfully, became quite a jolly and rather intelligent companion, and came out with the innumerable anecdotes of his sporting adventures. He could put a very decent dinner on the table, too, at the Hare and Hounds, and Hewitt's frequent invitation to him to join him therein and divide a bottle of the best cellar soon put two on the very best of terms. Good terms with Mr. Kentish was Hewitt's great desire, for the information he wanted was of the sort that could never be extracted from the casual questioning, but must be a matter of open communication by the publican, extracted in a way which it might be. "Look here," said Kentish one day, "I'll put you on a good thing, my boy, a real good thing. Of course, you know all about the Padfield 135 yards handicap being run off today." "Well, I hadn't looked into it much," Hewitt replied. "Ran the first rounds in heats last Saturday and Monday, didn't they?" "They did. Well," Kentish spoke in a stage whisper as he leaned over and rapped the table, "I've got the final winner of this house." He nodded his head and took a puff of cigar and added in his ordinary voice, "Don't say nothing." "No, of course not. Got something on, of course." "Rather, what do you think? Got any price I liked. Been saving him up for this. Why, he's got 21 yards and he can even time all the way. Fact. Why, he couldn't win running backwards. He won his heat on Monday like that." The gaffer snapped his fingers in default of better illustration and went on. "He might have it look a little easier, I think. It shortened his price, of course, him jumping in by 2 yards. But you can get decent odds now if you go right about it. You take my tip. Back him for a second heatin' Saturday, in the second round, and for the final. You'll get a good price for the final, if you pop it down once. But don't go making a song of it, will you know? I'm giving you a tip I wouldn't give anybody else." "Thanks very much. It's awfully kind of you. I'll do what you advise, but isn't there a dark horse anywhere else?" "No dark horse to me, my boy. Not dark to me. I know every man running like a book, old Taylor, him over at the cop. He's got a very good lad, 18 yards, and a very good lad indeed. And he's a trier this time, I know. But bless you, my lad could give him 10 instead of taking 3 and beat him then. When I'm running a real trier, I'm generally running something near a winner. You bet this time, and this time, I'm running the certainest winner I ever run. And I don't make the mistake often. You back him. I shall, if you're as sure as that, but who is he? Oh, Crockett's his name. Sammy Crockett. He's quite a new lad. I've got young Steggies look after him. Sticks him like wax. Takes his little breathers in my ground in the back here. I got a cinder sprint path there and over behind the trees. I don't let him out of sight much, I can tell you. He's a straight lad. He knows it'll be worth his while to stick to me, but there's some had poisoned him, and I thought he'd spoil their books. Soon afterward, the two strolled towards the tap room. I expect Sammy will be there, the landlord said, with Steggies. I don't hide him too much. They'd think I got something extra on if I did. In the tap room sat a lean, wire-drawn looking youth with sloping shoulders and a thin face, and by his side was a rather short, thick-set man who had an odd air, no matter what he did, of proprietorship and surveillance of the lean youth. Several other men sat about, and there was loud laughter under which the lean youth looked sheepishly angry. "'Tarn't no good, Sammy lad," someone was saying. "You're making a near web. She had to do out here." "Didn't like 'em so thread-papery," said another. "No, Sammy, you aren't the lad for she. I see her." "What about Nancy Webb?" asked Kentith, pushing open the door. "Sammy's all right anyway. You keep fit, my lad, and go on improving, and someday you'll have as good a house as me." Never mind the lasses. He had a glass of beer, has he? This is Raggy Staggles, who, answering the affirmative, viewed the charge as though he were a post, and the beer a recent coat of paint. "Has 2 glasses at midday," said the landlord to Hewitt. "Never puts on flesh, so he can stand it. Come on out now." He nodded to Staggles, who rose and marched Sammy Crockett away for exercise. On the following afternoon, it was Thursday, as Hewitt and Kentish chatted in the landlord's own snuggery, Staggles burst into the room in a great state of agitation and sputtered out, He's bolted! Gone away!" "What?" "Sammy, gone. I hooked it. I can't find him." The landlord stared blankly at the trainer, who stood with a sweater dangling from his hand, and stared blankly back. "What do you mean?" Kentish said at last. "Don't be a fool. He's in the place somewhere. Find him." But this Staggles defied anybody to do. He had already looked. He had left Crockett at the cinder path behind the trees in his running gear, with the addition of a long overcoat and a cap he used when going between the path and the house to guard against chill. "I was gonna give him a burst or 2 with a pistol," the trainer explained. "But when we got over to the other side, Raggy, says he, I'm blowing a bit chilly. I think I'll have a sweater. There's one in my box, ain't there?" So in I comes to the sweater, and warn't in his box, and when I found it and got back, he warn't there. They'd been out of him in the house, and ain't nowhere. Hewitt and the landlord, now thoroughly startled, searched everywhere, but to no purpose. "What should he go off to the other place for?" asked Kentish in a sweat of apprehension. "'Tain't chilly a bit, 'tis warm. He didn't want no sweater, he wore one before. There was a piece of kit of the table to be able to clear out. Nice thing this is. I stand to win 2 years' takings over him. Here, you'll have to find him. But how? Exclaimed the disconcerted trainer, dancing about distractedly. All I've got I could scrape off of myself. Where can I look? Here was Hewitt's opportunity. He took Kentish aside and whispered. He said he startled the landlord considerably. Yes, I'll tell you all about it, he said. If that's all you want. It's no good or harm to me whether I tell you or no. But can you find him? That I can't promise, of course. But you know who I am now and what I'm here for. If you like, I'll give me the information I want, and I'll go to the case for you, and, of course, I shan't charge any fee. I may have luck, you know, but I can't promise, of course. The landlord looked at Hewitt's face for a moment, then said, Done. It's a deal. Very good, Hewitt replied. Get together with the 1 or 2 papers you have, and we'll go into the business in the evening. As to Crockett, don't say a word to anybody. I'm afraid it must get out, since they all know about it in the house. But there's no use in making an unnecessary noise. Don't make hedging bets or do anything that will attract notice. Now we'll go over to the back and look at the cinder path of yours. Here Steggles, who was still standing there, was struck with an idea. How about old Taylor at the cop, governor, hey? He said meaningly. His lad's good enough to win with Sammy out, and Taylor is backing him plenty. Think he knows anything about this? Well, that's likely, Hewitt observed, before Kentish could reply. Yes, look here. Suppose Steggles goes and keeps an eye on the cop for an hour or two, in case there's anything to be heard of. Don't show yourself, of course. Kentish agreed, and the trainer went. When Hewitt and Kentish arrived at the path behind the trees, Hewitt at once began examining the ground. 1 or 2 rather large holes in the cinders were made on this, publican explained by Crockett, in practicing getting off of his mark. Behind these were several fresh tracks of spiked shoes. The tracks led up to within a couple of yards of the high fence bounding to the ground, and there stopped abruptly and entirely. And the fence, a little to the right of where the tracks stopped, there was a stout door. This Hewitt tried, and found it ajar. That's always kept bolted, Kentish said. He's gone out of that way. He couldn't have gone anywhere without coming through the house. But he isn't in the habit of making a 3 yards long step, is he? Hewitt asked, pointing at the last footmark, and then at the door, which is quite the distance away. Besides, he added, opening the door, there's no footprint here nor the outside the door. The door opened to a lane, with another fence and a thick plantation of trees on the other side. Kentish looked at the footmarks, then at the door, then down the lane, and finally back towards the house. That's a licker, he said. This is a quiet sort of lane, was Hewitt's next remark. No houses in sight. Where does it lead? Oh, that way goes to Old Kilns, disused, and this way down to turning off Padfield and Catton Road. Hewitt returned to the cinder path again and once more examined the footmarks. The traces back to the grass towards the house. Certainly, he said, he hasn't gone back to the house. Here's a double line of tracks side by side from the house. Steggles' ordinary boots with the iron tips and Crockett's running pumps. Thus, they came out. Here's Steggles' tracks in the opposite direction alone, made when he went back for the sweater. Crockett remained, you see, and the various prints in those loose cinders at the end of the path where he moved away in that. And then 2 or 3 paces toward the fence, not directly towards the door, you notice, and there they stopped dead. And then there were no more, either back or forward. Now, if he had wings, I should be tempted to the opinion that he flew straight away into the air from that spot, unless the earth swallowed him and closed again without leaving a wrinkle on its face. Kentish stared gloomily at the tracks and said nothing. However, Hewitt resumed, I think I'll take a little walk now and think it over. You go into the house and show yourself at the bar. If anybody wants to know how Crockett is, he's pretty well, thank you. By the way, can you get to the cop and the place of Taylor's and by this back lane? Oh, yes, down at the end of the leading to Catton Trail, turn to the left and the first right. Anyone will show you the cop. And Kentish shut the door behind the detective, who straightway walked toward the old kilns. In a little more than an hour he was back. It was now becoming dusk, and the landlord looked out papers from a box near the side window at his snuggery, for the sake of a little extra light. I've got these papers together for you, he said, as he entered. Any news? Nothing very great. Here's a bit of handwriting I want you to recognize, if you can. Get a light. Kentish lit a lamp, and Hewitt laid upon the paper table half a dozen small pieces of torn paper, evidently fragments of a letter which had been torn up, here reproduced in a facsimile. The landlord turned the scraps over and regarding them dubiously. They aren't much to recognize, anyhow. I don't know the writing. Where did you find them? They were lying in the lane at the back, a little way down. Plainly there are pieces of a note addressed to someone called Sammy, or something like it. See the first piece with its MMY? That is clearly from the beginning of the note, because there are no smooth line in between it, and the smooth straight edge of the paper above. Also, nothing follows on the same line. Someone writes to Crockett, presuming it to be a letter addressed to him, as I do for other reasons, as Sammy. But it is a pity that there are no more pieces of the letter to be found than these pieces, except the person who tore it up to put the rest in his pocket and dropped these by accident. Kentish, who had been picking up and examining each piece in turn, now dolorously broke out. Oh, it's plain that he's been sold out, bolted us and done. Me as took him in out of the gutter too. Look here, throw them over. That's plain enough. Can't mean anything else. Means throw me over and my friends. Me, after what I've done for him. And right away, go right away. I suppose he has done then. He was fiddling with the scraps and then finally fitted two together. Why, look here. This one with the lane on it fits over the one about throwing over. It means poor which is torn. That means poor fool, I suppose, or me, fathead, or something like that. That's nice. Why, I'd twist his neck if I could get a hold of him, and I will. Hewitt smiled. Perhaps it's not quite so uncomplimentary after all, he said. If you can't recognize the writing, never mind. But if he's gone away to sell you, it isn't much use to finding him, is it? He won't win if he doesn't want to. Why, he wouldn't dare to rope under my very eyes. I'd... Well, perhaps we'll get him to run after all, as well as he can. One thing is certain, he left this place of his own free will. Further, I think he's in Padfoot now. He went toward the town, I believe, and I don't think he means to sell you. Well, he shouldn't. I've made it worth his while to stick to me. I've put a 50 on him out of my own pocket and told him so. If he won, that would bring him a lot more than he'd probably get by going crooked, besides the prize money and anything I might give him over. But it seems to me he's putting me in the cart altogether. That we shall see. Meantime, don't mention anything I've told you to anyone, not even to Staggy's. He can't help us, but he might blurt things out inadvertently. Don't say anything about these pieces of paper, which I shall keep myself. By the by, Steggles is indoors, isn't he? Very well, keep him in. Don't let him be seen hunting about out there. I'll stay here tonight, and we'll proceed with Crockett's business in the morning. And now, we'll settle my business, please. Hey, Taka. Welcome in. In the morning, Hewitt took his breakfast in the snuggery, carefully listening to any conversation that might take place at the bar. Soon after 9 o'clock, a dog cart stopped outside, and a red-faced, loud-voiced man staggered in, greeting Kentish with the boy's cordiality. He had a drink with the landlord and said, "How's things? Fancy any of 'em in the sprint handicap? Got a lad of your own, haven't you?" "Oh, yes," Kentish replied. "Crockett. Only young and got none of his proper mark yet, I reckon. I think old Taylor's got number 1 this time." "Capital lad," the other said, with a confidential nod. "Shouldn't wonder at all. What do you want anything over it?" "No, I don't think so. I'm not on at present. Might have a little flutter on the grounds just for fun. Nothing else." There were a few more casual remarks, and then the red-faced man drove away. "Who was that?" asked Hewitt, who had watched the visitor through the snuggery window. "That's Danby, bookmaker. Cute chap. He's been told Crockett's missing, and I'll bet anything he came here to pump me. No good, though. As a matter of fact, I've worked Sammy Crockett into his books for about half it I'm in for altogether, through third parties, of course." Hewitt reached for his hat. "I'm going out for half an hour now," he said. "If Steggles wants to go out before I come back, don't let him. Let him go and smooth over all those tracks in the cinder path, very carefully. And, by the by, could you manage to have your son about the place today, in case I happen to want a little help out of doors?" "Certainly, I'll get him to stay in, but what do you want the cinder smoothed over for?" Hewitt smiled and patted his shoulder. "I'll explain all my little tricks when the job's done," he said, and went out. On the lane of Padfield to Sedby Village stood a plough beer house wherein J. Webb was licensed to sell all retail beer to be consumed on the premises or off, as the thirsty list. Nancy Webb, with a very fine color, very curly fringe, and a wide smiling mouth revealed a fine set of teeth, came to the bar at the summons of a stoutish old gentleman with spectacles, who walked with a stick. The stoutish old gentleman had a glass of bitter beer, and then said, in a very peculiarly quiet voice, in a very deaf man, "Can you tell me, if you please, the way to Catton Road?" "Down the lane, turn the right at the crossroads, and then first to the left." The old gentleman waited with his hand to his ear for a few seconds after he finished speaking, and then resumed in his whisper voice, "I'm afraid I'm very deaf this morning." He fumbled in his pocket and produced a notebook and pencil. "May I trouble you to write it down? I'm so very deaf at times that I thank you." The girl wrote down the directions, and the old gentleman bade her good morning and left. All down to the lane he walked slowly with his stick. At the crossroads he turned, put his stick under his arm, thrust the spectacles in his pocket, and strode away in the ordinary guise of Martin Hewitt. He pulled out his notebook, examined Miss Webb's directions very carefully, and then went off another way altogether, towards the Hare and Hounds. Kentish lounged moodily in his bar. "Well, my boy," he said, "has Steggles wiped out the tracks?" "Not yet. I haven't told him to. But he's somewhere about. I'll tell him now." "No, don't. I don't think we'll have that done after all. I expect he'll want to go out soon. At any rate, sometime during the day. Let him go wherever he likes. I'll sit upstairs in a bit of the clubroom." "Very well. How do you know Steggles will be going out?" "Well, he's pretty restless after his lost protege, isn't he? I don't suppose he'll be able to remain idle long." "And about Crockett, do you give him up?" "Oh, no, don't you be impatient. I can't say I'm quite confident yet of laying hold of him. The time is so short, you see, but I think I shall have news for you by this evening." Hewitt sat in the clubroom until the afternoon, taking his lunch there. At length he saw, through the front window, Raggy Steggle was walking down the road. In an instant Hewitt was downstairs and at the door. The road bent 80 yards away, and as soon as Steggle was past the bend, the detective hurried after him. All the way to Padfield town, and the more than half through it, Hewitt dogged the trainer. And then Steggle stopped by a corner and gave a small note to a boy who was playing near. The boy ran with the note to a bright, well-kept house at the opposite corner. Martin Hewitt was interested to observe the legend, H. Danby, contractor, on the board of the gate of the side wall of the garden beside the house. In 5 minutes, the door in the side gate opened, and the head and shoulders of a red-faced man emerged. Steggles immediately hurried across and disappeared through the gate. This was both interesting and instructive. Hewitt took up a position in the side street and waited. In 10 minutes, the trainer reappeared and hurried off in the way he had come, along the streets Hewitt had considerably left clear for him. Then Hewitt strolled to the smart house and took a good look at it. At one corner of the small piece of forecourt garden, near the rail, was a small, mosaic-covered, glass-fronted notice board stood on 2 posts. On its top edge appeared the words, H. Danby, houses to be sold or let. But the only notice pinned to the green baize within was an old and dusty one, inviting tenants for 3 shops, which were suitable for any business and which would be fitted to suit tenants. Apply within. Hewitt pushed open the front gate and rang the doorbell. There are some shops to let us see, he said when the maid appeared. I would like to see them. Will you let me have the key?
Master's out, sir. You can't see the shops till Monday.
Dear me, that's unfortunate. I'm afraid I can't wait until Monday. Didn't Mr. Danby leave any instructions in case anybody should inquire?
Yes, sir, as I've told you. He said anybody who called about them must come again on Monday.
Oh, very well then. I suppose I must try one of the shops in High Street, isn't it?
No, sir. They're all in the new part, Granville Road.
I'm afraid that will scarcely do, but I'll see. Good day. Martin Hewitt walked away a couple of streets lengths before he inquired the way to Granville Road. When at last he found the thoroughfare in a new and muddy suburb, crowded with brick heaps of half-finished streets, and took a slow walk along its entire length. It was a melancholy example of baffled enterprise. A row of a dozen or more shops had been built before the population had arrived to demand goods. Would-be tradesmen had taken many of the shops, and failure and disappointment stared from the windows. Some were half covered with shutters because the scanty stock scarce sufficed to fill the remaining half. Others were shut almost altogether, the inmates only keeping up the door for their own convenience, and perhaps keeping down the shutter for the sake of a little light. Others again had not yet fallen so low, had struggled bravely to maintain a show of business and prosperity, with very little success. Opposite the shops, there still remained a dusty, ill-treated hedge and a forlorn-looking field which an old board offered on building leases. Altogether, the most depressing spot. There was little difficulty in identifying the 3 shops offered by the lettering of H. Danby. They were all together near the middle of the row, and were the only ones that appeared not yet to be occupied. A dusty to-let bill hung in each window, with written directions to inquire of Mr. H. Danby, or at number 7 now. Number 7 was a melancholy baker's shop, with a stock of 3 loaves and a plate of stale buns. The disappointed baker assured Hewitt that he usually kept the keys of the shops, but that the landlord, Mr. Danby, had taken them away for the day before to see how the ceilings were standing, and had not returned them. But if you was thinking of taking a shop here, the poor baker added with some hesitation, if you'll excuse me advising you, I shouldn't recommend it. I've had a sickener of myself. Hewitt thanked the banker for his advice, wished him better luck in the future, and left. To hare and hounds, his pace was brisk. Come, he said as he met Kent's inquiring glance. This has been a very good day on the whole. I know where our man is now, and I think we can get him by a little management. Where is he? Oh, down in Padfield. As a matter of fact, he's been keeping there against his will, we shall find. I see that your friend, Mr. Danby, is a builder as well as a bookmaker. Not a regular builder. He speculates in the street of new houses now and then, that's all. But is he in it? He's as deep in it as anybody, I think. Now, don't fly into a passion. There are a few others in it as well, and you'll do harm if you don't keep quiet. But go and get the police. Come and fetch him. If you know where they're keeping him, why... So we will if we can't do it without them. But it's quite possible that we can, and without at all the disturbance, and perhaps delay that calling the police would involve. Consider now, in reference to your own arrangements, wouldn't it pay you better to get him back quickly, without a soul knowing? Perhaps not even Danby himself, until the heat has run tomorrow. Well, yes, it would, of course. Very well, then. So be it. Remember what I have told you about keeping your mouth shut. Say nothing to Steggles or anybody. Is there a cab or brown your son and I can have for the evening? There's an old hiring landau in the stables. You can shut up into the cab, if that'll do. Excellent. We'll run down to the town and get it as soon as it's ready. But first, what about Crockett? What sort of lad is he? Likely to give them trouble, show fight, make a disturbance? No, I should say not. He's no Pluckton. Certainly. All his manhood's in his legs, I believe. You see, he ain't a big sort of chap at best, and he'd be pretty easy to put upon. At least, I guess so. Very good. So much the better, for then he won't have been damaged, and they will probably only have one man to guard against him. Now, to the carriage. Young Kentish was a 6-foot sergeant of grenadiers, home on furlough and luxuriating in plain clothes. He and Hewitt walked a little way to the town, allowing the landau to catch up. They traveled in without 100 yards of the empty shops and then alighted, bidding the driver wait. I shall show you the 3 empty shops, Hewitt said, as he and the young Kentish walked towards Granville Road. I'm pretty sure that Sammy Crockett is in one of them, and I'm pretty sure that is the middle one. Take a look as we go past. When the shops had been slowly passed, Hewitt resumed. Now, did you see anything about the shops that told a tale of any sort? No, Sergeant Kentish said. I can't say I noticed anything beyond the fact that they were empty, and likely to stay so, I should think. We'll stroll back and look in at the windows, if nobody's watching us, he said. You see, it's reasonable to suppose that they'd put him in the middle one because that would suit their purpose best. The shops at each side of the 3 are occupied, and if the prisoner struggled or shouted or made an uproar, he might be heard if one were in the shops and next to those inhabited. So the middle shop is most likely. Now see there, he went on as they stopped before the window of the shop for questioning. Over at the back, there's a staircase not yet partitioned off. If it goes down below or up above, and the stairs and the floor near them, there are muddy footmarks. These must have been made today, else they would not be muddy, but dry and dusty, since there hasn't been a shower for over a week until today. Move on again. Then you notice that there were no other such marks on the shop. Consequently, the man with the muddy feet did not come in by the front door, but by the back. Otherwise, he would have made a trail to the door. So we will go around to the back ourselves. It was now growing dusk. The small pieces of ground behind the shops were bounded by a low fence containing a door for each house. This door is bolted outside, of course, Hewitt said, but there's no difficulty in climbing. I think we had better wait till the garden is dark. In the meantime, the jailer, whoever he is, may come out, which, in that case, we shall pounce on him as soon as he opens the door. You think you got a few yards of cord in your pocket, I think, and my handkerchief, properly rolled, will make a very good gag. Now over. They climbed the fence and quietly approached the house, placing themselves in an angle of the outhouse out of sight of the windows. There was no sound and no light appeared. Just above the ground, about a foot of window was visible, with a grating over it, apparently lighting a basement. Suddenly Hewitt touched the companion's arm and pointed towards the window. A faint rustling sound was perceptible, and nearly as could be discerned in the darkness. Some white blind or some covering was placed over the glass from the inside. Then came the sound of a striking match, and at the faint edge of the window there was a faint streak of light. "That's the place," Hewitt whispered. "Come, we'll make a push for it. You stand against the wall at one side of the door, and I'll stand at the other, and we'll have him come out. Quietly now, I'll startle them." He took a stone from among the rubbish littering the garden and flung it crashing through the window. There was a loud exclamation from within, a blind fell, and somebody rushed to the back door and flung it open. Instantly, Kentish let fly a heavy right-hander, and the man went over like a skittle. In a moment, Hewitt was upon him, and the gag was in his mouth. "Hold him," Hewitt whispered quietly. "I'll see if there are others." He peered through the window within. Sammy Crockett, his bare legs dangling from beneath his long overcoat, sat on a packing box, leaning over with his head in his hand and his back towards the window. A guttering candle stood in the mantelpiece, and the newspaper which had been stretched across the window lay scattered in sheets on the floor. No other person besides Sammy was visible. They led their prisoner indoors. Young Kentish recognized him as the public-house loafer and racecourse ruffian well known in the neighborhood. "So it's you, is it, Browdy?" he said. "I've caught you in one hard lump, and I've half a mind to make it a score more. But you'll get it pretty warm one way or the other, before this job's forgotten." Sammy Crockett was overjoyed at his rescue, and had not been ill-treated, he explained, but he had been thoroughly cowed by Browdy, who had from time to time threatened him savagely with an iron bar, by way of persuading him to quietness and submission. He had been fed, and been taken no worse for harm than stiffness in his adventure, due to the light under-attire and jersey and knit shorts. Sergeant Kentish tied Browdy's elbows firmly together from behind, and carried the line round the ankles, bracing it all up tight. Then he ran a knot from one wrist to the other, over the back of the neck, and left the prisoner trussed and helpless on a heap of straw that had been Sammy's bed. "You won't be very jolly, I expect," Kentish said. "For some time you can't shout and you can't walk, and I know you can't untie yourself. You'll get a bit hungry too, perhaps, but that'll give you an appetite. I don't suppose you'll be disturbed for some time tomorrow, unless our friend Danby turns up in the meantime, but you can come along to jail instead, if you prefer it." They left him where he lay, and Sammy took to the old landau. Sammy walked in slippers, carrying his spiked shoes hanging by the lace in his hand. "Ah," said Hewitt, "I think I know the name of the young lady who gave you those slippers." Crockett looked ashamed and indignant. "Yes," he said, "they've done me nicely between 'em, but I'll pay her. Hush, hush," Hewitt said. "You mustn't talk unkindly of a lady, you know. Get into the carriage and we'll take you home. We'll see if I can tell you of your adventures without making a mistake. First, you had a note from Miss Webb telling you that you were mistaken in supposing that she had slighted you, and that a matter of fact she was quite done with someone else, left him, of whom you were jealous. Isn't that so?" "Well, yes," Crockett answered, blushing deeply under the carriage lamp, "but I don't see how you come to know that." Then she went on to ask you to get rid of Steggles on Thursday afternoon for a few minutes and speak to her at the lane. Now, your running shoes, with their thin soles almost like paper, no heels and long spikes, hurt your feet terribly when you walk on hard ground, don't they?" They do that enough to cripple you. I'd never go on much hard ground with them." They're not cricket shoes, I see. Not a bit. Cricket shoes you can walk anywhere in. Well, she knew this, and I think I know who told her, and she promised to bring you a new pair of slippers and throw them to you over the fence for you to come out. I suppose she's been telling you all this? Crockett said mournfully. Goodness, in the letter, I saw her tear it up and put bits in her pocket. She asked me for it in the lane, in case Steggles saw it. Well, at any rate, you sent Steggles away, and the slippers did come over, and you went to the lane. You walked with her as far as the end of the road, and then you were seized and gagged and put into a carriage. That was Brody did that, said Crockett. Another chap I don't know, but why, this is Padfield High Street. He looked through the window and regarding familiar shops with astonishment. Of course it is. Where do you think it was? Why, there was a place you found me in. Granville Road, Padfield. I suppose they told you were in another town. Told me I was in Newstead Hatch. They drove for about 3 hours or 4 hours and kept me down to the floors of the seats so I couldn't see where we was going. Done for 2 reasons. First, to mystify you and to prevent any discovery of the people directing the conspiracy, and second, to be able to put you indoors at night and unobserved. Well, I think I've told you all you know yourself. Now, as far as the carriage. But there's Hare and Hounds just in front. We'll pull up here, and I'll get out and see if the coast is clear. I fancy Mr. Kentish would rather you came in unnoticed. In a few seconds, Hewitt was back, and Crockett was conveyed indoors by a side entrance. Hewitt's instructions to the landlord had been few, but emphatic. Don't tell Steggles about it, he said. Make an excuse to get rid of him, and send him out of the house. Take Crockett into some other bedroom, not his own, and let your son look after him. Then come here, and I'll tell you all about it. Sammy Crockett was undergoing a heavy grooming with white embrocation on the hands of Sergeant Kentish when the landlord returned to Hewitt. Does Danby know you've got him? He asked. How did you do it? Danby doesn't know yet, and with luck he won't know until he sees Crockett running tomorrow. The man who has sold you is Steggles. Steggles? Steggles it is. At the first, when Steggles rushed in to report Sammy Crockett missing, I suspected him. You didn't, I suppose. No, he's always been considered a straight man, and he looked as startled as anybody. Yes, I must say he acted it very well, but there's something suspicious in the story. What did he say? Crockett had remarked a chillness and asked for a sweater, which Steggles went to fetch. Now you think, you understand these things. Would any trainer who knew his business, as Steggles does, have gone to bring out a sweater for his man to change for his jersey in the open air, and the very time the man was complaining about chillness? Of course not. He would have taken this man indoors again and let him change there under shelter. Then supposing Steggles had really been surprised at missing Crockett, wouldn't he have looked about, found the open gate, and told you it was open when he first came in? He said nothing of that. We found the gate open ourselves. So for that beginning, I was certain opinion of Steggles. What you say seems pretty plain now, although it didn't strike me at the time. But if Steggles was selling us, why didn't he have drugged the lad? That would have been a much deal simpler. Because Steggles is a good trainer and has a certain reputation to keep up. It would have done him no good to have had a runner drugged while under his care. Certainly it would have cooked his goose with you. It was much safer to connive the kidnapping. Put all that in the active work into the hands and left him safe, even if the trick failed. Now, you remember that we traced the prints of Crockett's spiked shoes to within a couple of yards from the fence, and that they were ceased suddenly. Yes, you said you looked as though he had flown up into the air, and so it did. But I was sure that it was by that gate Crockett had left, and no other. He couldn't have got through the house without being seen, and there was no other way, let alone the evidence of the unbolted gate. Therefore, as the footprints ceased where they did, they were not repeated anywhere else in the lane. I knew that he had taken off his spiked shoes and probably changed them for something else. As a runner anxious to his chances would never risk walking on bare feet with a chance of cutting them. Ordinary, broad, smooth-soled slippers would leave no impression on the coarse cinders bordering the track, and nothing of sort of spiked shoes would have left it hard on the hard lane outside. The spike tracks were leading, but not directly toward the door, but the difference in the direction of the door, and then stopped. Someone had handed or thrown the slippers over the fence, and he had changed them on the spot. The enemy had calculated upon the spikes leaving a track in the lane which might lead us to our search, and had arranged accordingly. So far, so good. I could see no footprints near the gate of the lane. You will remember that I sent Staggles off to watch the cop before I went to the back, merely, of course, to get him out of the way. I went out of the house, and leaving the side, and walked the whole length toward the old hens. And then went back to the road. I found nothing to help me except these small pieces of paper, which are here in my pocketbook, by the way. Of course, this Emmy might have meant Jimmy or Tommy, and possibly Sammy, but they were not to be rejected on this account. Certainly Crockett had decoyed out of the ground, not taken by force, or there would have been the marks of a scuffle or the cinders. And his request for the sweater was probably an excuse, because it was not at all cold afternoon. He must have previously disdained going out. Interference, a letter received, and here were the pieces of the letter. Now, in the light of what I said first, look at these pieces. First, there is the Emmy. That I may deal with. Then we see the throw them over, clearly part of throw them over, exactly as had probably been done with slippers. Then poor F, coming just in the line before, and seen by joining up with the other pieces, might easily have been referenced to poor feet. These coincidences, one on the other, went far to establish the identity of the letter, and to confirm my previous impressions, but then there's something else. Two other pieces evidently mean left him and right away. Since Steggles right away, perhaps, there is also another containing almost all the words hate this with the word hate underlined. Now, who writes hate with the infamous of underscoring? Who but a woman? The writing is large and not very regular. It easily might be that of a half-educated woman. Here was something more. Sammy had been enticed away by a woman. Now I remember that when we went to the taproom on Wednesday, some of his companions were chaffing Crockett about a certain Nancy Webb, and the chaff had gone home, as plain to see. The woman then, who would almost easily entice Sammy Crockett, was Nancy Webb, and I learned more of her. Meanwhile, I took a look at the road at the end of the lane. It was damper than the lane, being lower and overhung by trees. There were many wheel tracks, but only one that turned in the road and went back the way it came, towards the town, and there were narrow wheels, carriage wheels. Crockett tells me now that they drove for about a long time before shutting him up. Probably the inconvenience of him taking him straight away to the hiding place didn't strike them when they first drove off. A few inquiries soon set me to the direction of Plough and Miss Nancy Webb. I had the curiosity to look around the place as I approached, and there, in the garden behind the house, were Staggles and the young lady in earnest confabulation. Every conjecture became a certainty. Staggles was the lover of whom Crockett was jealous, and he had employed the girl to bring Sammy out. I watched Staggles home, and gave you a hint to keep him there. But the thing that remained was to find Staggles' employer in the business. I was glad to be in when Dabney called. He came, of course, to hear if you would blurt out anything, and to learn, if possible, what steps were being taken. He failed. By the way of making assurance doubly sure, I took a short walk this morning in the character of the deaf gentleman, and got Miss Webb to write me directions that comprised 3 of the words in the scraps of paper: left, right, and lane. See, they correspond. the particular FTs, and all that. Now, I felt perfectly sure that Steggles would go for this pay today. It was the first place. I knew that people mixed up with shady transactions and professional pedestrianism were not apt to trust another, for they know better. Therefore, Steggles wouldn't have had to bribe first. He would take care of it and get it before Saturday heats were run, because once they were over, the thing was done, the principal conspirator might have refused to pay up, and Steggles couldn't have helped himself. Again, I hinted he should not go out till I could follow him, and I did. I saw him go into Dabney's house by the side way and come out again. Danby was in, then, who had arranged the business, and nobody was more likely, considering a large pecuniary stake against Crockett's winning this race. But now, how to find Crockett? I made up my mind he wouldn't be in the Danby's own house. That would deal way too risky, with servants about and so. I saw that Danby was a builder and had 3 shops to let. It was on paper before his house. What more likely a prison than an empty house? I knocked at the Danby's door and asked for the keys to the shops. I couldn't have them. The servant told me Danby was out, a manifest lie, for I had just seen him, and that nobody could see the shops until Monday. But I got out of the address of the shops, and that was all I wanted at the time. Nobody was about to see those shops until Monday. The interval was suspicious. Just enough to enable Crockett to be sent away again and cast loose on Saturday, racing after supposing him to be kept in one of the empty buildings. I went to them off at once and looked at the shops, forming my conclusions to which would be most likely for Danby's purpose. Here I had another confirmation of my ideas. A poor, half-bankrupt baker in one of the shops had, by the bills, the custody of a set of keys, but he, too, told me that I couldn't have them. Danby had taken them away, and on Thursday, the very day, with his trivial excuse that he brought them back. That was all I wanted, or could expect in the way of guidance. The whole thing was plain. The rest you know all about. Well, you're certainly as smart as they give you credit for, I must say. But suppose Danby had taken down his to-let notice. What would you have done then? We had our course even then. We should have gone to Danby and astounded him by telling him all this little games, and terrorized him by the threats of the law, and made him throw up his hand and send Crockett back. But, as it is, you see, he doesn't know about this moment, probably won't know until tomorrow afternoon, that the lad is safe and sound here. You will probably use this interval to make him pay for losing the game by some of the ingenious financial devices you are no doubt familiar with. Aye, that I will. He'll give any price against Crockett now, so long as the bet doesn't come direct from me. What about Crockett now? Hewitt went on. Won't this confinement be likely to damage his speed for a day or two? Perhaps, the landlord replied. But bless ye, that won't matter. There's 4 more in this heat tomorrow. 2 I know aren't triers. Another 2 I can hold at a couple of quid apiece any day. The 3rd round and final won't be till tomorrow week, and he'll be as fit as ever by then. It's as safe as ever as it was. How much are you going to have on? I'll lump it with you if you're safe enough. This is a chance not to be missed. It's picking up money. Thank you. I don't think I'll have anything to do with it. This professional pedestrian business doesn't seem a pretty one at all. I don't call myself a moralist, but if you'll excuse my saying so, the thing is scarcely the game I care to pick up money in, at any way. Oh, very well. If you think so, I won't persuade you. Though I don't think so much of your smartness as I did. After that, still, we won't quarrel. You've done me a mighty good turn, that I must say. I'd only feel I aren't level without doing something for you to pay the debt. Come now, you've got your trade, and I've got mine. Let me have the bill, or I'll pay it like a lord, and feel a deal more pleased if you made me a favor of it. Not that I'm above a favor, of course, but I prefer paying, and that's a fact. My dear sir, you have paid, Hewitt said with a smile. You paid in advance. It was a bargain, wasn't it? That I should be in your business and you should help me with mine. Well, a bargain's a bargain, and you've both performed our parts, and you mustn't be offended at what I just said now. That I won't. But as you do that raggy Staggles, once those heats are over tomorrow, well... It was on the following Sunday week that Martin Hewitt, in his rooms in London, turned over his paper and read, under the head, Padfield Annual 150 Yards Handicap, this announcement. Final heat, Crockett first, Willis second, Truby third, Owen 0, and Howell 0. A runaway win by nearly 3 yards.